For 20 years, my family had a name for me. The shame. They'd say it with a sigh, a sad shake of the head, like I was some burden they were forced to carry. They'd smile at family dinners, raising their glasses to family and legacy, all while they were secretly bleeding our inheritance dry. They never thought the quiet, broken outcast they worked so hard to create would be the one to bring it all crashing down. They never imagined their greatest shame would become the architect of their ruin. They were wrong. And this is the story of how I took back everything they stole from me, and then some. If you've ever felt like the black sheep in your own family, or if you just love a story where the underdog finally gets their day, you're in the right place. Trust me, the finale is worth the wait. It's funny, the things you remember. I can't pinpoint the exact moment the name-calling started. It was more like a slow, creeping chill that eventually settled over everything. The shame. It wasn't screamed in anger, at least not usually. It was worse. It was whispered with fake sympathy to friends over the phone. It was the heavy sigh from my father when my report card wasn't as perfect as my brother David's. It was the way my mother would look at me across the dinner table, a look that just screamed, "Why can't you just be normal?" My family was built on my grandfather's legacy. He started a high-end architectural firm, Sterling Designs, from scratch. His name meant integrity, innovation, and a kind of old-world class that you just don't see anymore. He built a small empire, not just of buildings, but of reputation. That was the legacy. When he passed, he left it to my father, who, along with my older brother David and my sister Clara, were supposed to be its guardians. David was the heir apparent, charismatic, ruthless, with a smile that could sell water to a drowning man. Clara was his biggest fan, his echo, happy to just be near his spotlight. And me, I was the artist, the quiet one, the one who saw beauty in the lines and spaces, but not in the spreadsheets. My grandfather saw it. He used to sit with me for hours, showing me blueprints, teaching me about load-bearing walls and the poetry of a well-designed space. "You have the gift, Alex," he'd say, his voice a low, comforting rumble. "Don't ever let them beat it out of you." But after he was gone, the gift became the problem. My passion for design was impractical. My sensitivity was a weakness. My quiet nature was just a lack of ambition. I'd hear them say things like, "Oh, Alex is in one of their moods again," or "Don't bother Alex with business, it'll just go right over their head." It was this constant, low-humming invalidation of who I was. Emotional manipulation was a work of art. They'd shame me for being different, for not fitting into the sharp-suited businessperson mold they wanted. If I tried to say I was hurt, I was being too sensitive or dramatic. If I pulled away, I was sullen and ungrateful. It was a classic gaslighting campaign that went on for years, and it worked. It made me question my own reality, my own worth. The message was loud and clear. I was the problem. I was the weak link. I was the family's shame. The money side of it was just as sneaky. When I was younger, I tried to work at the firm. I had ideas, designs inspired by my grandfather's original vision, but with a modern feel. I'd show them to my father, who would listen with this patient, patronizing smile. A few months later, I'd see my own concepts, twisted just enough, in a presentation by David, who'd be praised for his genius. When I tried to say something, I was told I was imagining it, that I was just jealous. "You're making things up, Alex," my father would say, his voice ice cold. "David is the future of this company. You need to accept that." It happened 3 times before I finally quit, feeling broken and convinced I really did have nothing to offer. They used my failure at the firm as proof. I was the cautionary tale, the one who couldn't cut it in the real world, so I retreated. I took freelance art gigs, lived in a tiny apartment, and kept my distance. I played the part they wrote for me, and I played it perfectly. I was the broken outcast. The breaking point, the moment the chill turned into a fire, came after my grandmother passed away. She was the last bit of my grandfather's warmth, the only one who still looked at me with pure, unconditional love. Her personal fortune was separate from the business, a big portfolio of stocks and properties. In her final years, she'd gotten frail, and my parents took over her finances. I wasn't surprised when the will was read and almost everything went to David and Clara. I was the shame, after all. I got a small sum, just enough for a few months' rent, and her art history books, a nice thought but basically worthless. But something felt off. My father explained with that familiar disappointed tone that Grandma's finances had been a mess. He said he and my mother had to sell most of her assets and sink the money into Sterling Designs to cover unexpected debts. He looked at me with pity. Some of these debts, he said slowly, came from bad investments made years ago. You were young, you wouldn't remember. He was implying it was somehow my fault, that my past failures were still costing them. It was such a blatant, insulting lie, and he delivered it so smoothly that for a second I almost believed him. That night, sitting in my apartment surrounded by my grandmother's books, I felt something shift. The grief was still there, a hollow ache in my chest, but underneath it something new was growing. It was cold, hard, and sharp. It was rage. They hadn't just stolen my inheritance, they had used my grandmother's memory to land one last, crushing blow to my self-worth. They had called me their shame, and in the quiet of that lonely apartment, I made a promise to myself. I would no longer be their shame. I would be their downfall. My grandfather told me not to let them beat the gift out of me. He just never specified which gift. I had a gift for seeing patterns, for understanding structure, and I was about to apply it not to buildings, but to the slow, careful demolition of my family. The first rule of a controlled demolition is to know the structure inside and out. You don't just start swinging a wrecking ball. You study the blueprints, find the weak spots, and plant your charges with precision. For 20 years, their empire of lies was built on my weakness. Now, that weakness would be my camouflage. My transformation didn't happen overnight. It started with one phone call. I called my father, putting on my best broken outcast voice, full of regret. I told him he was right. I'd been a failure, totally useless. I said I wanted to make up for it, to help out in any small way I could. I didn't ask for a design job. I asked for the most invisible job I could think of, archiving old records. I just want to feel useful, I whispered, faking a tremble in my voice. I could help sort through the old files in the basement, the ones nobody wants to deal with. My father, bless his arrogant heart, bought it hook, line, and sinker. For him, this was the ultimate win. The lost child, humbled and broken, coming home to literally work in the basement. It fit his story perfectly. "Of course, Alex," he said, his voice dripping with condescending pity. "It's time you learned some responsibility." The basement of Sterling Designs was a tomb of forgotten history. Decades of project files, financial ledgers, and old records were piled high in dusty boxes. It was a treasure trove of information, and they had just handed me the key. For months, I played the part. I organized, I cataloged, I made myself invisible. But at night, my tiny apartment became a war room. I wasn't just taking online art classes anymore. I was tearing through courses on forensic accounting and corporate law. I learned about shell corporations, hiding assets, and the dirty little dance of money laundering. The language of finance, once so foreign to me, became the language of my revenge. My first breakthrough came from the dust. Buried in a box from the late 90s, I found the original incorporation documents for the firm, and more importantly, the charter for the family trust my grandfather set up. It was designed to protect the family's assets and provide for all of us. But my grandfather, who never trusted anyone completely, had put in some very specific rules. The trustee, my father, had to give a full, audited annual report to all beneficiaries. I'd never seen one. He had also required that any major spending or any loan taken against the firm's assets needed the unanimous consent of all beneficiaries of my generation, David, Clara, and me. My heart was pounding. I just sat there on the dusty concrete floor, holding a piece of paper that proved the last 20 years were built on fraud. They didn't just sideline me, they were legally required to include me, and they never had. Every big decision, every loan was potentially illegal. This changed everything. I wasn't just looking for my stolen inheritance anymore. I was looking for a pattern of deliberate criminal behavior. I moved on to the digital archives. My menial job gave me a low-level security clearance, but it was enough. Late at night, when the building was quiet, I started my digital dig. I used what I'd learned to get around the flimsy security on the older accounting servers. It was terrifying. Every creak of the building made me jump. I had a few close calls. One night, a security guard found me in the server room. I told him my father had asked me to find some old project files, and the system was being slow. I played the part of the clueless, bumbling kid so well that he ended up helping me, complaining about the old tech right along with me. The digital files were a maze, but I had the map, the trust document. I started cross-referencing spending with project reports, and then I found it. A series of huge, regular payments to a company I'd never heard of. Apex Holdings LLC. No invoices, no project files, just wire transfers labeled consulting fees. A quick search showed Apex Holdings was a shell corporation. No assets, no operations. It was a ghost. The next step was finding out who was behind it. This took some social engineering that I wasn't proud of, but I had to do it. I knew my brother David loved to brag, especially after a few drinks. I started accidentally showing up at the fancy bar he went to. I'd keep my distance, nursing one drink for hours, looking pathetic. Eventually, he took the bait. He swaggered over one night full of smug pity. "Look at you, Alex," he slurred, still chasing shadows. I just let him talk. I let him brag about some new investment, a risky property deal he was funding on the side. He talked about his silent partners and the creative financing he'd set up. After 3 of these chance meetings, I had it. He was using Apex Holdings to funnel money from Sterling Designs into his own personal, high-risk deals. He was stealing from the family to build his own empire and using a shell company to cover his tracks. But the biggest piece of the puzzle, the one that made my blood run cold, was still to come. I needed physical proof. My parents were planning a long trip to Europe, a victory lap. While they were gone, I offered to house sit. "I'll water the plants, get the mail," I said meekly. "It's the least I can do." Of course, they agreed. Who better to trust than the harmless family failure? The night after they left, I went straight to my father's office. I was looking for a safe I remembered from childhood, hidden behind a panel in the bookshelf. It took me 2 hours and a lot of YouTube tutorials on safe cracking, but I finally got it open. Inside, among the expected papers, was a file folder with my name on it. My hands shook as I opened it. It was a loan document. A massive business loan for millions of dollars, taken out 5 years earlier. And at the bottom, listed as the primary guarantor, was my name, next to a nearly perfect forgery of my signature. I just sank to the floor. I remembered that year. The firm had been in trouble. My father told us all that a series of bad market breaks had almost ruined them. He'd gathered us together and announced he had secured a loan to save the company, a testament to his genius. He had looked right at me, making me feel guilty, reminding me that my failures had contributed to the problem. It was all a lie. There was no market break. The trouble came from David siphoning money through his shell company, and the loan, it wasn't to save the company. It was to cover up David's losses from a bad investment. They had forged my signature, making me legally on the hook for a fraudulent loan to cover up my brother's theft, all while blaming me for the crisis they created. This was it. This was beyond greed. This was a betrayal so deep it was almost breathtaking. They hadn't just written me off. They had used my name as a financial shield. If it all blew up, I would be the one to take the fall. I sat there for a long time in the dark, the forged signature staring up at me. Any last bit of hurt and sadness was gone, replaced by an icy calm. This wasn't just for me anymore. It was about avenging the legacy of integrity my grandfather had built. I carefully photographed every document in that safe. I put everything back exactly as I found it, closed the safe, and walked out of that house for the last time. The quiet, broken outcast was gone. In their place stood a silent architect, holding the blueprints to their destruction. The charges were set. All I had to do was wait for the right moment to push the button. The perfect place for a demolition is somewhere with meaning. For my family, that place was the annual Sterling Foundation Gala. It was the biggest night of their social year, a flashy party to celebrate the firm and, more importantly, to project an image of perfect success and family unity. It was a night dedicated to polishing the family name, the same name they used to shame me. This year, it would be the stage for its destruction. In the weeks before the gala, I was a ghost. I finalized everything with cold precision. I put everything I had into one devastating file: the trust document, the fraudulent wire transfers, the forged loan with my name on it, and a detailed analysis showing how they'd siphoned millions. I hired a top-tier forensic accounting firm and a tough litigation lawyer, both under a rock-solid NDA. They reviewed my findings, their professional shock confirming everything. My lawyer told me the evidence was overwhelming, pointing to multiple felonies: wire fraud, tax evasion, forgery. The list went on. The night of the gala, I didn't show up as the mousy outcast in a bad suit. I had spent my money on a perfectly tailored, dark suit that screamed quiet confidence. My hair was styled. I stood up straight, and for the first time in my life, I met their eyes without looking away. I saw them across the grand ballroom. My father holding court. My mother covered in jewels, a fake smile plastered on her face. And David and Clara laughing and preening, the golden children of a fraudulent dynasty. When David saw me, his smile faltered for a second, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. He saw someone he didn't know, and it unsettled him. Good. I spent the first hour mingling. I spoke to old family friends and business associates. I wasn't dramatic. I was calm, pleasant. I talked about my newfound passion for corporate governance, planting tiny seeds of doubt. The main event was David's speech. He was getting an award for visionary leadership. He walked onto the stage to a huge round of applause, the Sterling Designs logo on the giant screen behind him. He started his speech, full of cliches about legacy, integrity, and family. He talked about my grandfather's vision and how he and my father had carried the torch. That was my cue. As he paused for dramatic effect, I walked calmly toward the stage. A murmur went through the crowd. My family looked on, first confused, then horrified. A security guard moved to stop me, but I just looked at him and said quietly, "I'm a member of the family, it's fine." My confidence was so total that he hesitated, and that's all I needed. David stared at me, his face a mask of fury. "Alex, what the hell are you doing?" he hissed. I ignored him. I walked to the lectern and faced the crowd. I tapped the microphone. The sound echoed through the suddenly silent ballroom. "Good evening," I began, my voice steady and clear. "My brother David speaks of legacy and integrity. I'm here tonight to honor that legacy, too, the true legacy of my grandfather." I glanced at the tech booth, where a guy I'd hired was waiting. I gave a slight nod. "For 20 years," I continued, my eyes scanning the stunned faces, "my family has built an image of success. But a structure is only as strong as its foundation. And the foundation of this company is rotten." On the screen behind me, the company logo dissolved, replaced by a picture of my grandfather's trust, the clause about unanimous consent highlighted in red. You could hear people gasp. My grandfather believed in checks and balances. He required that all major financial decisions get consent from all his grandchildren. Consent that was never asked for, because for 20 years I was told I was worthless. The family's shame, they called me. I let that sink in. I could see my father getting out of his seat, his face turning purple. My mother looked like she was going to pass out. "They needed me to be a shame," I said, my voice dropping a little, pulling everyone in. "Because my weakness was their cover, a cover for this." Click, the screen changed to a flowchart. Sterling Designs on one side, a web of offshore accounts on the other. Connecting them was the shell company, Apex Holdings. The wire transfers, dates, and amounts flashed on the screen. For 15 years, my brother David has used this shell company to bleed Sterling Designs dry, funding his own lavish life and disastrous side projects. And my father looked the other way. David lunged for the mic, but I stepped back. "And when my brother's gambling disguised as investing finally failed," I said, my voice ringing out with cold anger, "how did they cover the losses? Did they take responsibility? No." Click, the final image, the forged loan document. My name, my forged signature, blown up to fill the entire screen. They took out a fraudulent, multi-million-dollar loan, and they signed my name to it. They made me, their shame, the guarantor of their crimes. If this company collapsed, I would be the one going to prison. My life would be ruined. The silence in the room was absolute. Every eye was on my family, who were frozen, exposed. "The shame," I said, my voice now quiet but carrying to every corner of the room, "was never mine. It was theirs." I turned and looked right at them, David, my father, Clara, my mother. I saw no remorse, just shock and pure hatred. "As of an hour ago," I announced, "a full dossier of this evidence was delivered to the IRS, the District Attorney's Office, and the State Banking Commission. And as of this moment, my lawyer is serving you with a civil suit. Right on cue, two people in sharp suits, my lawyer and his associate, walked through the main entrance and headed right for my family's table, papers in hand. The fallout was fast and brutal. The silence erupted into whispers and the flash of cameras from the press. My father roared and lunged towards the stage but was stopped by security. My mother just crumpled into her chair, sobbing. Clara stared, white-faced, like she couldn't process it. And David, he just stood there on stage, his visionary leadership award looking like a cheap prop in the ruins of his life. I didn't stay to watch. I walked off the stage, past the shocked faces, and out of the ballroom. As I stepped out into the cool night air, I didn't feel happy or triumphant. I just felt quiet. The weight I'd carried for 20 years was gone. The demolition was complete. That was the moment I had planned for, the end result of years of pain and secret preparation. It was about taking back control and making sure the truth came out. If this story resonates with you, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because there are so many stories out there about finding your power after being torn down. In the months that followed, the downfall was as total as I had planned. The news was brutal. Sterling Designs implodes amidst fraud allegations. The company was forced into receivership, the accounts frozen, the assets seized. The family name, once a symbol of prestige, was now just a synonym for scandal. My father and brother are facing criminal charges that will likely put them in prison for years. The civil suit stripped them of everything. They lost the houses, the cars, the whole gilded world they built on lies. I never spoke to them again. They tried angry voicemails from my father, tearful, manipulative calls from my mother blaming me for destroying the family. I didn't listen. There was nothing left to say. Was it revenge? Yes, but it was more than that. It was reclamation. I reclaimed my name, my identity, and the legacy my grandfather wanted for all of us, not just the chosen few. The money I recovered has been put into a new foundation in my grandfather's name, one that gives scholarships to underprivileged architecture students, a real legacy of building things, not stealing them. But there's a cost to a war like this, even when you win. I didn't just lose the family that harmed me, I had to mourn the family I never had. There's a bittersweet silence in my life now. The constant noise of their judgment is gone, and in its place is a deep and sometimes lonely peace. I am no longer the shame. I am no longer the broken outcast. I am simply Alex, an architect in my own right, not of buildings, but of my own life. And I'm building it on a foundation of truth, one that will never be torn down again. If you have a similar story of overcoming, I'd be interested to read about it in the comments below. Thank you for listening.